Today I'd like to welcome James Robinson, who's the stage director of our production of Nixon in China. Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So tell me, what is your relationship with this piece originally? When did you first direct it?
I was asked by Opera Theater of St. Louis back in 2004 to take on Nixon in China, and the opera had really not been done since the original version of it that was done in, what was that, the mid-80s, 87.
Right.
So Opera Theater of St. Louis decided to forge the path with a new production of Nixon. There was a great deal of interest in the opera, and several companies came on board. So we put together a co-production of Nixon in China, and it's been making the rounds since 2004.
And the design was by?
Alan Moyer, a frequent collaborator of mine. James Schutte, who is the costume designer, choreography by Sean Curran, lighting design by Paul Palazzo, and video design by Wendell Harrington.
Sean has been with us. He actually directed our Salome.
Oh, right, of course.
Which was just brilliant.
And that was a show that originated in St. Louis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, as I recall, St. Louis, first of all, is summer festival.
Yes, late spring, May, June.
But that's a small stage, is it not?
You know, it's deceptive because it's actually a thrust theater.
Right. I just remember it being so
it's
so
very
much
intimate.
smaller than the Civic Theater is what I'm saying.
Yes. What's interesting is the actual proscenium opening in St. Louis is quite wide. But it's not a terribly deep theater, and there's a thrust, so the audience is on three sides.
Right.
And the audience is very close to the action. So we frequently do operas with other opera companies, all different sizes. The Wexford Festival, which is a smaller theater in Ireland, the San Francisco Opera we've done things with, which is a much larger theater. And as long as you know what you're getting into, you can front load any issues.
I guess that my immediate thought is that you have to somehow open it up from doing it in St. Louis and then doing it on the Civic Theater or the War Memorial Opera House.
Yeah, it's fortunately we've been doing this for so long, we know how to address all of those problems. So if we happen to be moving into a theater that is a lot larger, we build in those problem-solving issues early on, and actually the production has never gone to a smaller theater. It's always gone to a larger theater. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have to approach this particular opera any differently than you would traditional repertoire? I mean, in many ways it's like traditional repertoire, but in some ways it's not. Did you have to make adjustments in your own mind in terms of staging it?
Well, I think my philosophy with this piece, you approach every piece uniquely. Doing a Mozart opera is very different than doing Puccini. But Nixon in China is unique, as are all of John Adams' operas, because I often say Nixon is not dramatic, but it's very theatrical. So Death of Klinghoffer, which is another opera of his that we've done.
Very oratorio-like.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So they're extremely theatrical, but they're not necessarily dramatic in a conventional way. Nevertheless, you have to find a way of telling the story, and that's where the fun comes in.
Yeah, it can't be static.
Oh, no. And there's something about Nixon in China, the music is so... it's so kinetic. It pulses. It's about movement, and once we figured out how we wanted to approach that, it came off the page fairly easily.
Right. How do you describe the music as a stage director? Now, you're a stage director who does a lot of opera, so you're familiar with a lot of the standard music. I don't want you to compare, but just from your own ears, how do you describe the music for Nixon in China?
It's funny. I think people have cast John Adams into the school of minimalism, and I think early on, you have Steve Reich and Philip Glass and John Adams and Terry Riley, who are all doing somewhat similar things, but I don't think of Nixon as a minimalist piece. It has elements of minimalism, meaning relatively simple chord progressions, sort of the basics of what we would say are accompanimental figures and all of that stuff. But I think of him as kind of a maximalist minimalist. The music has a lot of melody in it, a lot of drive, something that would seem to not be exactly what minimalism is about.
Right.
But there are soaring melodies, brilliant choruses in it, incredibly wonderful orchestrations. It's a wildly colorful piece.
Oh, you can't make this comparison, but it's like listening to a kaleidoscope.
It is.
There are so many colors.
It is
marvelous,
and it just keeps going and going. And I think that it's a piece that captures the kind of giddiness and the epic nature, both at the same time, of this trip to China that Nixon made. It's nothing. The opera does not have any Orientalism. A term that we would probably use to describe impressionistic music, but there isn't any of that, and it's kind of unabashedly American.
Yeah.
It has foxtrots and dance numbers and
sounds jazzy at some points, almost like rock at others.
Absolutely,
because of that steady pulse.
Absolutely, and the orchestration has saxophones and synthesizers and interesting percussion. So, when I listen to it, I think this is truly an American piece about an American subject.
Yeah. I'm excited by the fact that it's coming. It's interesting. You should call Adams a maximalist, minimalist. His quote that I absolutely love and have been using over and over again is that he's a minimalist who is bored with minimalism.
That's a very good way of putting it, yes.
That is perfect. It really is, because there are so many other layers of his work that are simply too complex, I think, to be simply called a minimalist.
I was going to say, and every piece that he does is very different. Yet, you always know what you're getting in terms of who is the composer. You can always listen to a John Adams opera and say, that's John Adams music, no matter what he's doing. I find people often say, oh, I hate modern music, or I don't like to go to modern opera. And I think what they're saying is they don't like opera that is not tonal, functionally tonal. But actually, John Adams is an unabashed tonalist.
Very much so.
Yeah. And he pushes tonalism in a bit, but no more than, say, they would in jazz or rock music.
Right.
So I don't find this to be a thorny, difficult opera. He does not embrace dodecaphonic techniques, 12-tone music.
Right.
He's not like one of those people. And and I find the music very, very approachable, and it's very exciting. Having done a ton of operas in my day, I have to say I don't get tired of this opera.
Yeah, I can't imagine that you would. There's always something interesting, and there's always something different pulling you back to it.
Oh, absolutely, and there's a certain joyfulness in the piece. And then it's a very reflective, introspective piece. I find parts of it incredibly touching also. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of which, one of the most touching moments in the piece occurs during the dance in Act 2. This is, for you folks, it is a recreation of the Red Detachment of Women, which is a ballet that was, quote-unquote, choreographed. I don't know how much she actually had to do with it, but it was actually choreographed by Madame Mao, and the Nixons and the American diplomatic party had to sit through it. And the story is essentially this girl in a village is overpowered by the village overlord, and she is saved by the Red Detachment. Pat Nixon gets involved. She inserts herself into the action of the ballet, which I find, at first I thought, well, this is outrageous. Of course, that didn't happen.
Right.
Poor Pat had to just sit there and watch it. But here in this opera, the character of Patricia Nixon gets up, walks on stage, and tries to save the girl.
It's true.
And it just, I don't know why it's so touching,
but it is.
Absolutely breaks me up every time I see it.
And it gives this kind of insight into Pat Nixon's humanity, and it's an interesting story, the Red Detachment of Women, because it's actually based on Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Is it?
And so it was a very American subject in many ways, but of course the whole point of the Red Detachment of Women is to slam imperialists, capitalists,
right.
the West,
right.
and to talk about how great Mao's efforts, the new China is. The new China meaning Mao's China, not imperialist China. And there's not, even the real Red Detachment of Women, there is nothing Asian sounding or Chinese sounding about that music, mostly because Madame Mao did her ballet shopping in Russia. And she wanted Russian-style ballet dancers, soaring inspirational music with this story. And it was all, part of the Cultural Revolution, and, out with the old in a very violent, tragic way. And then in with the new, and this is the new art, the new teaching method. So it's quite fascinating.
Well, we're all looking very much forward to Nixon in China, and thank you for being here. And
my pleasure. It's a real treat to be doing this at the San Diego Opera.
We'll see you again.
All right, very good. Thank you.